So without further ado, Julia, thank you for being here and take it away.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for that lovely introduction. I do have a slide to introduce myself, but I think you did a far better job than I did, so I'm just going to go with that. And before I get started, I just wanted to encourage all of you to ask questions. I have thoughts about what will be helpful for you this evening, but I want you to share with me what's going to be helpful for you. So share your experiences if it makes sense. If you have questions, I love questions. There should be an option to raise your hand if you don't feel like unmuting yourself. But I don't want folks to get hung up. If you have a question in the first 5 minutes and you're thinking about your question, I don't want you to miss everything that comes after it because you're thinking about your question. So by all means, type into the chat window if you want to, raise your hand or do the hand raise icon. Generally, I don't mind being interrupted, but I do like to finish my sentence. So we can, save questions if we have time at the end also then. So obviously it's not a long presentation, but I have a short agenda, trying to understand what makes the busy season so busy, why it is so important to keep up with your record keeping during the busy season. And then we'll go over a few tips to stay on top of things. So number one is, why is it so hard to keep up with record keeping? And I'm curious to know from folks if it's just during the busy season or if it's year round that you have a hard time. I was sort of thinking about the different challenges farmers have, and obviously there's not enough time in the day. And I know Ben, for example, was saying that he needs to go out after this webinar and set up his irrigation lines while there's still time in the day. So obviously time is a big issue. Another issue is having the right systems in place and, figuring out how to work optimally. So, obviously in the fields, you have systems to, streamline your processes to make things go as efficiently as possible. And we need to consider, what systems do we need to have in place with our bookkeeping and office work so that it doesn't take as much time as it needs to, or it currently does. And, obviously right now we're not going to develop the systems, but figuring out what we can do moving forward so that we have more time in the future, in future seasons. And I'm curious if folks have some thoughts to share, if you want to share in the chat window, if there are issues that you have that make it so hard in the busy season to keep up with your record keeping, if we need to address some of the other concerns that you all have. Do folks have issues that they want to share? Well, I don't want to put anybody on the spot to have to share anything, so I'm just going to go along. But I do want to reiterate why it is so important to keep up with your record keeping, even during the busy season. And, number one is, do you need to adjust as necessary? And, I just was talking with a farmer right now, earlier today, who needs to take out a loan to make his payroll. And, the question is, could he have avoided that had he been able to keep up with his record keeping up until that point, to know like what's coming down the pike? What do I have today? What do I have next week? And, having a real strong handle on your numbers so that you can adjust as needed. Do you need to drum up more sales, or was the farmer's market not as robust as you wanted it to be? So what do you need to do to make payroll next week? So it's, even though there are other things that feel just as important, the record keeping is really important for day-to-day, maintenance in the summer, even during this peak season. Beyond that, in November, you can be proactive and planning for the future, doing analysis on the back, historically, what happened during the year, plan for the coming year, what do you want to do, what goals do you want to set, what equipment do you want to purchase? And if you're behind on your bookkeeping, then come November, you're going to be reactive. You're going to be catching up on what you didn't do over the summer and not planning for the future. So, keeping up today can help you grow in the future. And, keeping up today ensures that that you have good data instead of just kind of shoving it in. And, again, talking to that farmer today, trying to figure out where he needs to hustle to make things come together. We don't have any numbers to work on because he's fallen behind. So we can't make the decisions without good data. So a couple of issues that have come up, not having that many staff on the farm full time. Some folks only help on harvest days. So everybody needs to be on the same page in terms of what needs to be recorded and how. Yes, so staffing is definitely an issue. And, some of the standard operating procedures, for the farm can help streamline systems to create time for the office work. Ben said that the consequences are not as obvious as hooking up the drip irrigation. And that is so true. But I do want to reiterate that, the consequences don't hit as hard, but the consequences are very real. And Jason is not knowing where to start and not seeing successful examples of that. That is true. And Anna is talking about having so many spreadsheets and trying to streamline them to be more efficient. And that, goes back to, one thing that we're going to talk about is, how do you set up systems so that you can streamline the process? The more systems you have in place, the easier it will be. And if it's, just sort of a hodgepodge of, shoving numbers here and there, it makes it harder to use the data at the end. Neurospicy farmer. I've never heard that expression. I don't know if that's a typo or not, but I like it. And yeah, it is overwhelming where to get started. So I would say, start small, and, an Excel spreadsheet is better than nothing. And at the end of the webinar, I will offer some resources for next steps that can help you all think about where to go from here. So obviously time, did somebody have a question?
Julia, I was just going to say to Jason's point that, I think a lot of people, only to take it big picture for a minute, that a lot of people get into farming because they like the technical side of it, of working with animals or working with crops. And culturally, we don't have a lot of things that teach us how to, keep good records, run a successful business, file the correct forms with the state, et cetera. And that's just speaks to the importance of this and a lot of other workshops like it, that it's not as exciting as talking about, undercover planting clover with your peppers, but it's very important.
It is really important. And you bring up a really good point in that, one of the things that I say often is that everything sucks some of the time. And, we go into farming because we want to work for ourselves, we want to work outside. But, I don't think there's any job in the world that doesn't have some suck factor to it. And going into business for yourself means, having that intrinsic motivation to do things even when we don't want them to, even when we don't want to do these things. And it's one of those hard truths about entrepreneurship and business ownership, that if we want to succeed in farming, we need to, not just be technically skilled in farming, but we also need to be skilled managers, and we need to develop those skills. But it's hard. It's hard when there's so much going on, and I don't want to minimize that, because especially now there's so much going on. This is peak production and we're up to our eyeballs in zucchini and cucumbers and all the other cucurbits and squashes. So let's talk about time, which I think is the most obvious limiting factor. And one of the things I wanted to suggest is, thinking about how do you spend your time? And how many of you have folks seen the Important Urgent Matrix? And it's a tool to help think about, so we've got a couple of hands raised. It's a tool to help you think about how you're spending your time. So we have things that we do during the day that are important, and we have things that we do that are not important, and things that are urgent and things that are not urgent. So if you think about all the different things that you have going on in your day, how would you put those into the 4 quadrants: important and urgent, not important, etc.? And the things that are important and urgent are the things that are a necessity. The important, not urgent, are the strategy and planning. And the things that are not important, the distractions, interruptions, and the time wasters. So obviously, we're most focused on the urgent and important tasks, like setting up the drip irrigation, harvesting the cucumbers, particularly, today in New England, you have a limited window before the rain starts, so you got to get all your stuff done. So those things are urgent and important. And what can you delegate to other people so that you can spend some more time in the strategy and planning quadrant of activities that you have in your life? And Eliana asked if screenshots are okay. Totally okay at the end of the presentation. Actually, if you want to go to my website, juliashanks.com/presentations, you can download the slides now, or you can go there after the presentation and I'll give you the link again, but totally fine to screenshot. So question is, what can you delegate? And second is, what's going on in the not important quadrants that you can let go of? So I'll give you some examples of things that go on in the different quadrants. And I actually want to spend a few moments in the not important side of things that I think sometimes we mistake as important. And, the email notifications or the phone calls, I think sometimes we get tethered to our phones, and I've worked with one farmer that, answers every single phone call that comes in. And every time you break to answer the phone, it takes you a minute to get back into what you're doing. So, thinking about turning off your email notifications, turning off your ringer for chunks of time, and devoting parts of your day for email response, phone calls, so that you can work uninterrupted on the other important activities. Something else that I wanted to call out was things that are the low value crops. And, I was talking with one farmer who, was feeling behind on the tomato plantings, and he was behind on the tomato plantings because the strawberry crops took up, the strawberries in the spring took up so much time. And then he says, well, the strawberries don't really earn a profit. I just do them because the customers love them and it keeps customers coming back. And there's an example of spending time on things that don't benefit the farm and distract you from the more profitable activities, whether it's profitable crops or, the cash flow planning that's going to ensure that you stay cash positive and profitable. The irony of this, of course, is that, if you don't have a good record keeping system, you don't necessarily know what the low value crops are. I can offer one quick exercise if you want to think about what crops are quote unquote low value. and I got distracted. Jason is asking about the balance of low value crops in a CSA. And, certainly there's a balance between having diversity in your crops and too much focus on one crop. Tomatoes, for example, as a lot of farmers have shared with me, are not particularly profitable, but you need tomatoes to draw people in. But do you need, 27 varieties of tomatoes, or do you need just enough to pull people in and just enough to have that diversity? So finding the balance of diversity plus high value crops. One exercise that you can do, at this point in the season, not necessarily earlier, at this point in the season, everything is in the ground. So everything that you've spent up until this point is a sunk cost. We're not going to recoup any of the cost of seeds, soil amendments, the labor to plant and weed, etc. Now we can think about what is the time to harvest and get the product ready for sale, and what's the potential revenue. So, if I can harvest, 50 pounds of 50 pounds of cucumbers in an hour, and I can sell them for $3 a pound, how much revenue do I generate per hour of labor? So think about what crops are going to generate the most revenue for each hour of labor. Also in the not urgent category is employee drama. I don't, for those of you who have coworkers and getting sucked into, he said, she said, they said, what happened last night, etc. Trying to step away from those things that can take time. And I will acknowledge that I tend to mindlessly scroll through my phone too. And I'm not saying that any of you do that, especially when you're as busy as you are this time of year, but those are the kinds of things that can eat away at time. So I don't know if folks wanted to sort of offer some things that are going on for them in their matrix that maybe they want to reconsider where things fit into their category, or maybe you're not sure where activities fit in. And yes, Jeannie says the webinar is being recorded.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Where would you consider team bonding and uniting your farm team? Because sometimes those moments happen, of course, while you're working and having conversations in the field, but sometimes there's moments when you're not working, and it's like, what kind of importance would that be if it's taking away from work, but it's bonding the team?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that there, for sure there's a balance, there's work-life balance, and, you want this to be fun. And is there a way that you can put boundaries around it, so that it's like, okay, Wednesdays at 6 o'clock, let's all, go to the local lake and take a swim together, or, something like that. Because I think it is important to work together closely, but making sure that it doesn't, expand beyond, a reasonable amount of time, because time that's bonding is not necessarily time that you can afford this time of year. And, saving the bonding time for the, November, December, when the first snow falls, as opposed to, in July and August. That said, obviously it is important to restore and rejuvenate ourselves so that we can work efficiently. So I think it is a balance in terms of those two. So Christine asks where Instagram lands, because sometimes it feels like a very important marketing tool, and it is a time suck. Yes, I would agree that social media can be a time suck this time of year. And, it's interesting because how much is it really driving customers to your farm stand? And how much is it, just interacting with people? That a lot of times people, enjoy photos, but it doesn't necessarily drive business. So I would ask you, how important it really is it to this revenue of the business. And actually that it brings me up to, to that earlier point, what can you delegate? What's on your priority list? And I have cash flow planning, harvesting, irrigation, repairs, bookkeeping, marketing, and promotion. I put marketing and promotion in the not urgent category. And Ben also comments about getting people to sign up for your fall and winter shares starting soon. And obviously that is important, and that starts to move up from not urgent to urgent. But the second question is, what's important, and what's important that I need to do versus what can I delegate? And, some of these harvesting tasks we can delegate. Social media, we can, ask our crew to take photos for us, or, maybe they have something pithy to say. Can you share your Instagram account with a couple of your colleagues to support that? Is there a CSA member who would be willing to volunteer to manage your social media account? So thinking about, what can you delegate so that you can spend more time on the business planning, ensuring that you have customers signing up for your CSA, staying on top of your bookkeeping, etc. Does that answer your question, Christine, about marketing?
Yes, thank you so much.
And Ben, did you want to say more about the CSA winter signups?
You definitely hit the nail on the head. It's the kind of thing that didn't seem urgent a month ago, and now that it's starting in 2 weeks, feels very urgent.
Yeah.
And I think there's, these are boxes, but of course we all know that something doesn't like hop one day from one box into the other. They sometimes
It's a slow
slowly
creep.
flow. Yep.
Yeah. And, and I think it's a constant, reevaluation of what's going on and making sure that, did we just lose Ben? We did. Yeah, so I think it is a constant reprioritization and figuring out how you can, conserve your time for what's really important. So now that we've sort of considered what we can do to have more time and more space available, I wanted to offer what I call bookkeeping snacks. And I don't know if have you all heard about exercise snacks? And, they're like 2-minute bursts of exercise, and research has suggested that exercise snacks, even 2 minutes can be just as beneficial as getting a full workout. And, a 2-minute burst of exercise here, a 2-minute burst of exercise there, and you can have a real, real health benefit. And I would like to offer that bookkeeping snacks, a 2-minute burst here, a 2-minute burst there, can help, put together a record keeping system that you can stay on top of it, that it doesn't have to be, 2 hours every day. It can be, when you have 5 minutes, or, if you're at your computer already, take an extra 10 minutes to do a bookkeeping task. So I want to offer a couple of snacks for you. So snack number 1 is to catch up on your bank feed. How many of you are using QuickBooks or QuickBooks Online? And I can't really see everybody's faces. So if folks want to just sort of type into their chat window, Fresh is using QuickBooks, Lauren is using QuickBooks, Raymond's using QuickBooks. So if you're using QuickBooks, I think the bank feed is a great way to stay, to keep up on top of things. And so in QuickBooks, you can set up your bank to download all the transactions into QuickBooks. And then from the bank feed, you can match them with manually entered transactions. You can add new transactions, and you can transfer from one account to another. So I don't know that we need to talk about matching transactions, because that assumes that you've been manually entering in things proactively, which during the busy season probably isn't happening. So, we're going to rely on the bank feed to enter new transactions. So when you get into the bank feed, you can open up the each transaction, and this is a pretend company. So, but when you open up the window, you have the option to categorize, find a match, or record a transfer. And I want to caution you to select the appropriate category. QuickBooks is always trying to help you. It's trying to not second guess, but I feel like it's second guessing you. It's trying to guess what you're trying to do. If you got something from Amazon, it's like, oh, well, you got office supplies from Amazon last time, so certainly this time from Amazon you also got office supplies, but we know that isn't true. The one thing I wanted to highlight for you is that you're not wed to one entry. So, if you go to the local hardware store, you don't have to just pick fencing supplies or field supplies. If you click on the little box, it says split, that you can break out your transactions into 4 or 5, as many line items as you want, so that you can really have things properly categorized. So it's not just, getting the transactions into QuickBooks so that you know how much cash you have in the bank, but it's also getting them into QuickBooks effectively so that at the end of the year, when you are doing that forward planning, you know where the cash went. So you can just click on the split button to have like 5 lines to break out the different expenses. So, okay, yeah. I forgot that I put all that animation in. Now we can see the animation of the things that I was just talking about. Snack number 2 is to check your cash position. And, I have a little quote down here at the bottom, and a farmer said this to me. It was so powerful. If your weekend farmer's market didn't go well, you know in real time what you need to do during the week to make payroll, for example. How much produce do you need to hustle and sell? And, knowing your cash position knows where you are. So if you need to hustle and sell, you know what you need to do. So snack number 2 is make sure you know how much cash you have in the bank. What adjustments do you need to make? And are you getting yourself in trouble? Are you on the verge of bouncing checks? And I feel like right now we're sort of on that cusp where we're going from the hemorrhaging cash to the cash flow starting to come in and peak growing season. I find that the best way to see my cash balance is to look at the balance sheet. And if I look at the balance sheet, and this balance sheet is this is more or less what it looks like when you get it in QuickBooks, but I kind of squeezed it a little bit to make it fit on the slide. So when you look at your own balance sheet, it's going to look a little different than this. But if you look at the current asset section, you'll see, what do you have in your different bank accounts? You'll also see accounts receivable. So if you've been creating invoices for wholesale clients, for example, you can see in accounts receivable how much your customers owe you. And if you're in a cash crunch, oh, I got $1,700 in receivables. I need to start calling these people. Now I know where to go. If you have inventory, and again, depending on how up to date you are with your record keeping, if you have inventory, you can see what do I have on hand that I can sell to drum up cash. On the liabilities side, you have accounts payable, what you owe to your vendors. You have credit card debt. So if you're entering in your credit card transactions, so you can see a quick snapshot of what you have and what bills you have coming up soon. And so it can be a really powerful tool for cash planning to know where you stand with the different things. So looking at your balance sheet can tell you that. How many of you look at your balance sheet, and any questions about the balance sheet? I appreciate you laughing, Christine, about the balance sheet. I know that it is not the most common, and it's, obviously there was only 3 financial statements, but I would say of the 3, it is the most underappreciated and the most valuable. So I do encourage folks to take a look at their balance sheet, and if nothing else, take a look at the current assets section to see what you have in your bank account and see what you have in accounts receivable, to see, where you stand. So snack number 3 is to enter your sales details. And, this time of year, it's, your memory is fresh, exactly what you sold. And if you enter it now, you're going to have a really good record. It's going to be so hard. Of all the things to catch up on, trying to catch up on your sales data is going to be the most difficult. So I think it's one of the things that's really important to stay on top of. And one of the ways that you can do it in QuickBooks is by creating a sales receipt. And, you can detail out, I sold a package of ground pork, and I sold a package of chicken sausage and pork sausage, and this is how much I sold. What gets really complicated about sales receipts, and especially if you take online sales, is what you sell is not what gets into your bank account. So if you're using Square or PayPal or Stripe, you may sell $100 worth of product, but only $97 makes it into your bank account, because of the fees that they take out. So if you're using the bank feed, it can be really complicated trying to match what Square is telling you that you're doing with what QuickBooks tells you that you're doing. And one of the ways that I've discovered that we can work around this is by depositing the sales, instead of depositing it into your bank account and trying to reconcile it, and it never works and it's a mess and you're trying to change your sales receipts. What you can do instead is deposit into a clearing account. So I created a pretend bank account. You can call it Square Clearing. If you're using Square, you can call it Daily Sales Receipts, which is what I often talk about. And you can deposit all the sales into the Square Bank, Square Clearing, and then when you find the deposit on your bank feed, you can record it as a transfer from Square Clearing into your regular bank. So that way you can sort of get everything in without making a mess, and then it's just a transfer. And Fresh Rockstar is saying that that's what they do. Fresh, did you want to share more about that?
I don't know how much more I have to share, but our harvest bags, which is kind of like our CSA, people mostly purchase through Square. And then I'll just every time I see that transaction, throw it into Square Clearing. And then at some point when I'm ready to sit down and do them all, I pull up Square, I look and see what it was for. Most of the time it's for the bags. Sometimes it's for some other thing that I've also sold through Square. I look and see how much the fees were, and then I just try to get it all to balance out in zero in that other feed that you had, and then it's all done.
Yeah. So it's a great way to sort of get things in without worrying about balancing your bank account. And then you can come back and clean it up, check your bank fees, get the bank fees squared away there too. So Jeannie asks, what system do you recommend for collecting sales data? Which is a great question. And I think it's my next slide. Thank you for queuing me up. That's awesome. So, there, on one hand, you can, if you're already using Square, certainly you can set up items in your Square account to, use Square as a POS. And I will share with you that you can use, most people think about, most people think about Square as a credit card processing system, but Square is also a POS system, a point of sale system. So you can enter all your sales into Square, whether people pay you with cash, check, or credit card. So you can, enter it as a cash payment into Square just to have the record of it, even if it isn't processed through a credit card. Another option, which is a lot more straightforward, is just to have a spreadsheet. And I'll share a link with you to download this spreadsheet at the end. But it's a really simple equation. If you take inventory, like if you go to a farmer's market, and you say, I've gone to the farmer's market, I've got $500 worth of beef, I've got $600 worth of pork, $400 worth of chicken, $200 worth of tomatoes, etc. And then you count what you have at the end of the market. And the difference is what you sold. So now we have a pretty quick record of the value of the product that we sold. In the spreadsheet that I'll give you all a link to download, you could also say, how much did you start with in your cash box? How much do you have at the end of the day? So you can see how much cash you received in sales. And, checking out if your cash box is short or not. So that's one way to do things. And, using Square as a POS, not just a credit card processor, is a second way to do that. Any questions? The other way to do things is, in Excel. I know I talk a lot about QuickBooks, but QuickBooks can be a bit of a sledgehammer when a little, tap will do fine. So if you're working in Excel, what I would recommend is that you create a chart of accounts and create a system so that you're entering in transactions the same way every time. So you want to know if it's a production cost, overhead, sales and marketing, or labor, so that at the end of the year, when you go to analyze things, you can sort things by your chart of accounts. You can sort things by the sales channel. So you can really group your different expenses, that it's not just like, oh, this is where I spent the money, but can I categorize it and get meaning out of it? And I also, I'll get to your question, Christine, in a moment. I did want to end with an encouragement to take a deep breath, that I know that it's a stressful time of year. It's exciting with all the produce coming in, but it's stressful and overwhelming. And during these times, we can get emotional. And when we're emotional, it's really hard to make effective decisions. For, making decisions, I think it helps, looking at the pragmatic, what do I need to do? And our numbers can tell us what we need to do. But what really I find diffuses the emotional charge of this time is to think through the logistics, and not just like, I need to do this, but what are 2 or 3 steps that I can do to achieve that? And, having concrete steps, is, even if it isn't the complete answer, can help to diffuse some of the emotion, because this is such wonderful work that we're all doing, and I want all of you to be successful. So Christine says, I'm hoping there's a slide about how to manage production costs in CSA models and best practices to manage forecasting. Oof. We don't have a slide in here for that today. I would say in terms of managing production costs, the part of knowing the way to manage is to have a budget, to say, what do I need to do to get things done? And we can create a budget based on historicals. What did I spend last year and what did that do for me? So, this keeping up with our bookkeeping now is all part of the cycle of getting ahead and staying ahead and being proactive. So if we can keep good records now, at the end of the year in November, we can get together again and talk about how to manage production costs, looking back, where did the cash go? Where can I save money? With a good record keeping system, you can say, oh, this is where I spent my money. I spent 14% of revenue on seeds. That's completely not sustainable. I need to do better than that. I need to either raise my prices, better manage my seed inventory or something. So all of this is helping us to get to that place where we can better forecast and better grow for profitability. Great question, Christine. Thank you. I wanted to offer for you all, I have a ton of resources on my website, and it does cost money, but if you use the discount code IL as an Illinois farmer, you can get a month free to get everything that you need. And on there, there's videos on how to use QuickBooks. I have under webinars, I have Excel tips. Under the business templates, I've got the inventory template that I shared with you. I also have an Excel template that you can use for record keeping. So there's tons of resources that I alluded to today that you can use, that you can access from my website. If you want the presentation from today, you can go to juliashanks.com/presentations, and the very top is a link to today's presentation. And the webinar will be recorded, so I will let Ben and Jeannie tell you how they will get that to you. And I am happy to stick around for a few questions, but I think Jeannie wanted to wrap things up.
Yeah, I'll be quick in case people have questions, but yeah, thanks everybody for coming today. The webinar is recorded and we'll send it out on the listserv. So if you're not a part of the listserv, I'm putting a link in the chat, and if you fill out that form, then you will be a part of it, and that's where we post updates and happenings for our chapter. And then also we usually post them on Instagram, so which is, the link is there if you don't follow us. And then we're really excited because we have our next event officially on the calendar. So it's going to be October 1st and 2nd. So we're doing it on a Sunday to Monday. So that people who have farmers markets on Saturdays can attend. And we alluded to this event at the beginning. It's our Farmily reunion, and it's a day and overnight camping trip and farm to table dinner and place where farmers in Northern Illinois can gather and get to know each other. It's where Ben and Fresh met last year and realized that they're neighbors. And so, yeah, it's always really good food. We have live music, people camp out. And so this year it's going to be at Piscataquis Gardens, which is in Harvard, Illinois. And so we don't have a place to buy tickets yet, but just put the date down. And then if you're signed up for the listserv and the Instagram, you'll get the information on that. So I think that's it. I don't know, Ben, or if anybody else has anything to share.
I was just going to make a quick plug that we have an education, a social, and a policy committee. And if you want to get a little bit more involved specifically in one of those areas, to just contact one of us. So I'm with the education committee, Alyssa's with the social, Jason's with the policy, and we are trying to plan some more different education events coming up in the fall. So just contact one of us.
Awesome, thank you. Well, thank you all for having me, and I'm happy to stick around for a few more questions. If folks had questions, let me know. We can talk about what we talked about tonight, or if you have other questions about record keeping and bookkeeping. Oh, that's the other thing I want to say. There is a webinar on my website about record keeping and bookkeeping in general. There are a lot of questions about how to set up a system so it's not overwhelming because you're just getting started. So I encourage you to watch the webinar on my website on record keeping systems, and that's a great place to start.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This was really helpful, not only for the information, but to know other people are worrying about this too.
Awesome. Thank you. Great to have you here.
Take care, everybody.
Take care.
Hey, Julia, I had a question, just that this is not such a specific question, although I do have something on how to figure out the whole equity part of that balance sheet. But
Yeah.
it seems like you talked a lot earlier about time and just, you know, how to look at your own time and how you're spending it, because if you can just figure out how to spend it most efficiently, then these things will happen, and in addition to watering your fields and such.
Yeah.
So kind of like what systems have you seen other farms implement to basically, you know, set reminders, whether it's on your phone or other calendar app, that because, you know, I have a time every week where I'm supposed to enter receipts and do all that stuff, but the number of weeks where I just push that away and do something else are countless. So like, what have you seen other farms do to get around that, I guess?
Well, I was going to say my suggestion is to put a calendar, you know, to give yourself a block of time during the day that this is what you do. And I think one of my suggestions also is that it's not like this is the time that I'm going to do my record keeping. This is the time that I do my office work, because you're at your computer. So, you know, if you can take 5 minutes when you're at your computer, whether it's doing email or, doing, your weekly CSA reminders to your subscribers, what's in their box, tacking on 5 minutes during your office time, during your computer time, rather than trying to take an hour to do record keeping. But I do think in general, blocking time in your calendar, setting reminders can be really helpful. The other suggestion I have is to think about your rhythms and, when is the best time for you to do the brain work? And, for me, and I think because I'm comfortable with QuickBooks, the time for me to do QuickBooks is at 6 o'clock at night when I'm totally fried from the day, and it's my mindless work. But maybe for you, it's in the morning, when you have your cup of coffee and you're just getting started, and before the crew comes in, that really that's the time that you need to be doing your bookkeeping, because you need to be fresh and not exhausted, because when you're exhausted, it's the last thing you want to do. So I think it helps to really understand your rhythms and when you work best and when is the best time for you to do it.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful.
Curious if other folks have suggestions. You said you had another question. I'm certainly delighted to take other questions if folks have it.
I'm not sure if you're referring to me. My question's kind of involved one about the whole equity side of the balance sheet, but I don't know if we have time for that. That's pretty involved.
Well, why don't you preview it and we'll see if we have time.
Well, I was having some tech difficulties with my computer, but it seemed like I didn't quite remember the specifics on your balance sheet there, but
it seems like I've filled out balance sheets before, and I guess that piece of equity, it kind of like, where do you start figuring out? It depends on all your assets and liabilities and all. I know that, but I don't quite know how to figure that out, and that's a big piece of the puzzle. So I think it helps to look more specifics. I can't remember what was on the sheet that you used as an
Yeah.
example.
So I do have the sheet up on my screen again. But the general formula for the balance sheet is that assets equals liabilities plus owner's equity. And the assets are what you have, and the liabilities and equity is how you got them. So did you borrow money to get your assets, or did you earn money to get your assets? And the formula can be turned around that assets minus liabilities equals equity. So the equity on your balance sheet as generated by QuickBooks is auto-calculated, and assets minus liabilities always equals equity. So the equity that QuickBooks is showing to you is your net income, because that's what you earned. It's also your retained earnings. And this is where QuickBooks terminology kind of changes in different places. But you might see, I don't even know, there's so many different ways they call it. I call it retained earnings, but it's like the accumulated profits that the business has generated. So if 2 years ago you had $3,000 in profit and last year you had $2,000 in profit, then you've retained earnings in the business of $5,000. So one of the numbers in the equity section is the accumulated profits that your business has had. If you have a freezer, for example, this farmer has a $24,000 freezer, and if they just sort of put it on the balance sheet and they said, they entered in, the somehow or another they got the freezer, they want to get it on the balance sheet, QuickBooks will ask you for the beginning balance. And so there's also a line on the equity section for beginning balances. So anything that you sort of quote unquote put on the balance sheet with its beginning balance is your equity. It's like, if you have that freezer, how did you get it? You earned it. It's mine. I put it there. I own it. So I have that claim. So the equity section is sort of a mashup of money that you've invested directly, your retained earnings or net income, and the beginning balances of all the assets that you just sort of put on the balance sheet. And we answered that in 2 minutes.
Gotcha. That makes sense. I know that is really helpful. Sorry to drag everybody into the equity weeds.
That's okay. I mean, I think the balance sheet is so important, and if you want to dive into it, I'm delighted to dive into the balance sheet. Well, I'm happy to take one more question, but certainly I don't want to keep folks if you don't have questions. I know it's late and been a long day, so I want to thank you all for having me. It was great to be with you tonight. Thank you, Ben and Jeannie, for organizing, and hopefully you'll find the resources on my website helpful.
Thank you so much for
Yes,
joining
thank
us,
you.
Julia.
Thank you. Take care.
Wonderful.